Hello, my name is Dr. Jacqueline. I'm with DTP-Leadership Group, and this is Hot Topic Bold Talk. I'm really invested in getting you all educated about what is really happening with gerrymandering, because I think it's something we need to fully understand and at the same time be able to do what we need to do to protect our voting rights and a number of other things that I think are going on. It's not just about gerrymandering. It is really a grab for power. It's a grab for eliminating voters from the right to vote. There are many things that are going on with it. My title for this tonight is Exposing Gerrymandering's Assault on Fair Representation and the Fight to Save Our Republic. Now, I want to introduce it by saying across America, the fight for fair representation has become one of the most urgent struggles of our times. Elections should be decided by voters, not by politicians who carve up maps to guarantee their own grasp or grabbing for power. Yet state after state is turning democracy into a rigged game. Gerrymandering is not just about drawing district lines, it's about power. It's about silencing voices. It's about locking in control for the few while stripping representation away from the many. This episode takes you even more inside into the battle of the lines of democracy itself. We will travel from Indiana to Missouri, from Ohio to Texas, and down to Florida. We will look back at the history of gerrymandering again and learn more things about it and the court cases that shaped it. And we'll look forward to the Supreme Court showdown in Louisiana that could define the future of the Voting Rights Act. And it's coming up in October. The fight for fair maps isn't abstract. It affects every American. What laws get passed, which communities are heard, and whether our democracy truly works. And it is not working right now. Now, there are actions being taken against gerrymandering, but when you have a president that is sending people to talk to state representatives and governors to force them into redrawing their maps, then we are in a different era. Let's go to Indiana first, a state that is truly under pressure. In Indiana, Donald Trump has gone far beyond rallies and speeches. He's summoning lawmakers to the White House. Vice President J.D. Vance has met with state leaders to demand a mid-decade redraw of Indiana's congressional map. Traditionally, maps are drawn once per decade for a census count. Indiana has already drawn their map, but the pressure from Washington is to redraw them again, simply to flip 2 congressional seats before the midterms. This is an unprecedented way of doing business. Even Republicans in the state of Missouri have voiced concerns, warning that changing rules midstream destroys public trust. Yet the national GOP's message is clear: secure more seats, no matter the cost. If Indiana goes through with its plan, it would break through standing precedent and reveal that redistricting is no longer tied to demographic change. It's simply a tool to hold power indefinitely. And that's what he's trying to do, our president. Let's go to Missouri. This is a very extreme gerrymandering ram through. Missouri lawmakers have already pushed through one of the harshest gerrymanders in the country. Their map rips across Kansas City, splitting communities so that urban and rural voters lose collective power. Some of the very legislators who voted for this scheme had previously spoken out against it and at mid-decade redistricting. The House Speaker pro tem even admitted in July that such a move would be out of character for Missouri. Yet just 2 months later, he caved to pressure and brought it to a vote. Why the reversal? Because national leaders demanded it. Because Washington insiders saw an opportunity to squeeze out one more seat. The voices of Missouri voters, from civil rights organizations to labor unions to small business groups, were dismissed in this whole process. This is what gerrymandering looks like. It is a betrayal of the people for the sake of partisan gain. And it leaves Missouri less represented, less heard, and less free. Let's go to Ohio. It was a battleground state in the past, and now it's a laboratory for gerrymandering. Ohio, once considered a bellwether, is now a laboratory for extreme gerrymandering. Barack Obama carried Ohio twice, but today the state sends 10 Republicans and just 5 Democrats to Congress. And extremists are now openly talking about tipping the balance to 13 Republicans and only 2 Democrats. How did it get here? In 2015, Ohio voters passed a constitutional amendment to create a redistricting commission. It was supposed to guarantee fairness, but politicians ignored the will of the people. They drew maps that were struck down by the courts again and again, and yet elections still went forward under those illegal maps. The Ohio Supreme Court demanded the lawmakers use independent map drawers. Politicians ignored them. Instead, they stalled, passed new gerrymanders, and ran out the clock. Ohio's story shows how that when they're in power and they break laws like this, and they defy courts, and they get away with it, citizens need to stand up, get organized, and fight for their right for all of us to vote and have an equal voting opportunity. Now I live in Texas. It's an egregious case that the map that they've drawn. Texas is probably the most egregious case in America today. Court evidence reveals that it takes 3 Latino voters or 5 Black voters to equal the power of 1 white voter under Texas current maps. I would be stunned that the Supreme Court would ever allow this, but I'm not sure what the Supreme Court will do today with the people that's on it. This is a state where nearly 60% of our population is people of color, and where 95% of the last decade's growth has been from the Latino community. Yet instead of expanding representation, which needs to be done, politicians have systematically diluted it. This is not new. Texas had been doing this for years. And that's why the Voter Rights Act was really important. Now there are lawsuits going on about it. But since the Supreme Court gutted the pre-clearance in Shelby versus Holder, states like Texas no longer need federal approval before implementing discriminatory maps. Civil rights groups, like All Online, have filed lawsuits arguing that this is a textbook violation of the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The outcome could reshape how minority communities are represented for generations. Let's go to Florida. DeSantis is gaslighting people with his lies, and he's doing a power grab as well. Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis is posed to follow Texas. On national TV, DeSantis claims that Democrats like Barack Obama and Eric Holder had orchestrated brutal gerrymandering during the last census. This is a flat-out lie. It is a flat-out lie. The truth is the opposite. Obama and Holder created the NDRC to fight gerrymandering, not to enforce it. But DeSantis is gaslighting, and he's doing it for a purpose, to prepare the ground for another redraw in Florida. He's even suggested Florida deserves an extra congressional seat, an absurd claim meant to justify tearing up maps again. The Florida House has already formed a selection committee on congressional redistricting. People from Florida themselves oppose this. Polling shows that a majority, even Republicans in Florida, see mid-decade redraw as a waste of tax money dollars and a threat to fair elections. Yet DeSantis pushes forward, aiming to silence voters and secure long-term power for his party. There is a bright spot, Utah and Wisconsin. So let me talk about those. There are victories that we can celebrate. In Utah, the legislature repealed Proposition 4, which is a citizen initiative that created an independent redistricting commission. Independent, nonpartisan. But the legislature replaced it with a hollow substitute, SB 200. But in August 2025, a state court ruled that repealed unconstitutional and reinstated Proposition 4. So they repealed SB 200. That was extremely discriminatory. This ruling restored real and anti-gerrymandering protections, guaranteed transparency, and ensured that Utah's maps must follow community lines rather than partisan convenience. In Wisconsin, the story took over a decade to unfold in 2011. Governor Scott Walker and his allies imposed extreme gerrymanders and dismantled checks on their powers. Yet grassroots resistance never gave up to the 2023. They finally gave up in 2023. Not only that, a judge won the election to the Supreme Court, so it flipped the balance. And it was a very difficult race, and she won. By 2024, Governor Tony Evers' fair maps were finally enacted. These stories remind us that fairness is possible when the citizens of the state refuse to have gerrymandering done. Even after years of manipulation, they got through it. That's the reason we don't want this manipulation. It takes sometimes years to get it back to where it is fair. So they prove in these two states, Utah and Wisconsin, that when citizens fight, democracy can win. Now, let me tell you about the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And I've told you before in some of my podcasts, but I want to give you more information. At the national level, the NDRC has led the charge against gerrymandering. It was founded in 2017 at President Obama's direction and led by Eric Holder. The NDRC was designed to take on partisan and racial gerrymandering and take them on and stop what was going on. Their approach is comprehensive. Litigation in state and federal courts, grassroots organizing to raise awareness, electoral engagement to elect leaders committed to fair maps. And as a result, it's real. In 2021 and 2022 cycle, Republicans began with 20% less control of redistricting than they had in previous decades. Holder has called this the era of perpetual redistricting, reminding us that the fight is ongoing and it must be relentless. Now, the NRRT is the Republican strategy. Republicans have their own machine. The National Republican Redistricting Trust, led by Adam Kindred, supported by dark money from Fair Lines America. The NRRT has coordinated partisan redrawing across Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and Texas. Kindred himself said it's clear it's a priority to keep the House, and the Republicans should be looking for as many seats as we can get, he said. This is not a slip of the tongue. It's a strategy. We're going to look at for as many seats as we can get, no matter that it's tearing down the fair map system. It shows us that the stark difference between one side, which is fighting for fairness, which are the Democrats, and the other is fighting to lock in power regardless of the cost to our democracy. Now, the Supreme Court has a role. The Supreme Court looms large in this fight. On October 15, 2025, it will hear Louisiana versus Callis, a case that could decide whether Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act remains intact. Just 3 years ago, in Allen versus Milligan, the Supreme Court upheld Section 2 and forced Alabama to redraw maps to include more minority representation. If the court reverses its snap now, it will strip away one of the last guardrails protecting communities of color. John Begonia of All on the Line has warned that such a reversal will be a head-spinning betrayal of precedent, and it would sign that partisan majorities on the court are willing to abandon protections enshrined in the civil rights era and in the Constitution. Please forgive me for butchering John's name, but he is president of the All on the Line organization, and you can go and find out much more about him. I want to conclude this podcast by saying, please listen to my podcast again. Learn more about what's going on and start fighting in your states. I don't care if you're in one of those states that has unfair maps. Then start finding about it, marching, doing whatever you need to do, calling your Congress people and saying, this is unacceptable to us. So we stand at a crossroads. Down one path lies fairness, accountability, and a democracy where every vote counts. Down the other lies manipulation, silenced communities, and entrenched minority rule. Know that the mega Republicans are minority rule. The extremist religious groups that they have are minority rule. That is not what most Americans support. The victories in Utah and Wisconsin remind us that fairness is possible. The tireless work of All on the Line, the NDRC, and Bright America show us that democracy still has defenders. And Public Citizen is one of the largest groups of lawyers that are fighting for our rights. But democracy cannot defend itself. It requires every one of its citizens, advocates, and communities to stand vigilant. Let's speak up. Let's speak up, to organize, to refuse to let partisan extremists silence us. The stakes could not be higher. The future of our republic depends on the choices that you and I make today. Thank you for listening to me. I do want to add something that I think is very important for you to know. I have a number of references, and those will appear in this summary of the podcast write-up, and they will also appear in the blog, because I want you to know where I'm getting my references. And I want you to understand these organizations that are fighting for us. If you appreciate what I'm doing, then also sign up on Patreon and support me. Thank you.